to come back again.
Hello there. The movie I'd like to talk about today is one of my favorites, sentimental favorite, Friday the 13th from 1980. Directed by Sean Cunningham. He made it for about $550,000 and it went on to make 59.8 million roughly in the box office worldwide gross total, so fairly successful. It was the first independent movie to be picked up by a major distributor, Paramount Films. It was filmed around September, October 1979 in Blairstown, Hardwick, and Hope, New Jersey. And they got permission to film in a real Boy Scout camp called Camp Novi Bosco. But, like I said, September, October, they had to film it after the season had ended. So they were racing against the clock to finish the film before the leaves changed and temperature got too cold. I'm sure it was already cold enough. Unfortunately, some of the the actors had to do a beach scene, so I'm sure that was fun, swimming in a cold lake. And as a former camp staff member myself for 3 seasons, didn't matter what season, what time of the year you were in, midsummer, that lake was still cold. So couldn't have been much fun in September, October when they were doing it. Plus the rain sequences. The good last third of the movie is almost an entire rain sequence, and some of these characters had to go wandering around. They got Tom Savini to do makeup effects, and he did a pretty good job. I mean, limited budget, limited resources, I'm sure, out in the woods and nowhere. Nothing's over the top, nothing's splashy, but it does the job. It doesn't hold back on the violence of what he was trying to go for. So it's a really good job. And Harry Manfredini with the music, intentionally copying Jaws with the motif. He wrote a piece of music for the killer. Anytime the killer is present, there would be music, more or less. So you don't always see the killer, but the killer is there if you hear the music, more or less, through the movie. It's a really fun movie. It's one of my favorites, like I say, as a camp staff member. Sean Cunningham admits it that he wanted to do a cash grab on the Halloween series success. He saw how much money that thing was making, so he's like, well, what can I do? And he already made a couple movies, one with Wes Craven, Last House on the Left, and he was looking for the next big thing, and he saw Halloween and maybe a couple other movies in that vein, and the Halloween was the main drive. And he's like, oh, well, I want some of that money. So, simple formula. Teenagers, isolated, away from authorities, and no easy way for authorities to get to them. Simple premise, simple setup. It's really, and if it's not broke, don't fix it. So what they did is, they got a bunch of these actors from New York, and said, hey, you want to make a movie? Let's go make a movie. And they're like, great, I can work cheap. And they're like, that's great, I like that cheapness. I like that, you're hired, basically. And so they got these actors, and the only one that I remember out of anything is, everybody remembers Kevin Bacon. Kevin Bacon is in this movie, and unfortunately I don't know if it's on his IMDb resume. Some actors are hesitant about putting their previous horror movie roles onto IMDb or their resumes. Like George Clooney did horror movies, Renee Zellweger and Matthew McConaughey were in one of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies, and Matthew McConaughey acts his ass off in that movie. He's probably the most entertaining part of that movie. And Jennifer Aniston was in Leprechaun. So, you got to start somewhere, and they started pretty fun movies. So the plot's pretty basic. He's got these kids back in 1958, two counselors, Barry and Claudette, decide to go have fun in the boat shack. And the killer or person wandering around camp that night decides they don't like that, so They don't meet a very good end. Barry gets stabbed in the stomach, and Claudette, you don't see what happens to her. It freeze frames, and then you go into the title card. But all right, what in less than a minute of the movie, roughly, you have 2 kills, starting off the bat. Then it jumps over into present time, 1980. If you think about the timeline of the movies, you're in trouble. The less you think about it, really the best, because this movie starts on Friday the 13th. The second one starts about 5 years time jump into the future, even though the movie came out the year after this one. And then the third movie takes place right after number 2, so it's actually Saturday the 14th, and the fourth one takes place roughly around the same time, right after number 3. The less you think about it, the better. That's not even including all the other ones, especially then Jason Goes to Space, and then Freddy versus Jason, and then the reboot, which mushes together 1 through 4 into one film, basically. Anyway, the basic plot of the movie, 1980, the present day, Annie is this kid, and she's going into town, and she stops at the diner for directions after trying to interrogate a dog for directions, but that doesn't work out too well, so she needs to go find some humans. She ends up going into the town diner, where she meets Enos, who will give her a ride to camp, which is about 20 miles away, so he agrees to take her halfway there. On the way out of the diner, they meet Crazy Ralph, the local town nut, who tries to warn her and anybody that will listen to him that it's not a good place to go. Back at the camp, you meet Steve Christie, who's trying to remove some logs, and Steve meets the rest of the counselors, Ned, Jack, Bill, Marcy, Brenda, and Alice, played by Adrienne King, who unfortunately developed a stalker after this movie came out. And so she didn't want to be in the second movie. She agreed to be in the second one, but only if she got killed off right away, so she didn't have to deal with it. I hope she's doing better. I think she is. Anyway, Ned leaves to go get supplies from town, leaving everybody alone at camp. Ned, wandering around, sees somebody enter a cabin and follows whoever that is into the cabin. You never see Ned again alive. Jack and Marcy, they decide nobody's around, we're having fun, there's no authority. That cabin's looking pretty good, so they go off into the cabin and they have sex in the cabin, not knowing that Ned is right above them dead. Marcy leaves after they have fun, and Jack is killed with an arrow through the neck. Fun effect by Tom Savini and his assistant. One of them's pushing the arrow through, and the other one is blowing on air pipe to try to get the blood through the prosthetic. Doesn't really go off too well, and they end up blowing more blood than they need, and it ends up kind of creating a gusher, which is unintended. Good look on the film. So Jack's dead, Ned's dead, Marcy, she goes to the showers and the bathrooms to clean herself up. Plus she said she had to go to the bathroom. She's killed. She gets an axe to the face out in the showers. Out in the main room, the main cabin, Brenda, Bill, and Alice are playing strip Monopoly, and Alice is running the tables on them. They see the rainstorm going on. Brenda decides, oh no, I left my cabin windows open, I gotta go. So she goes off, she goes back to her cabin, decides to read a book before going to sleep. She ends up hearing a voice yelling in the woods for help. She decides to go out. Even though she's got a raincoat, she decides not to wear a raincoat for some reason. She just goes out in her nightgown, which I'm sure was very cold with that cold rain in the late September. She ends up going onto the archery range. You never see her again. Steve, meanwhile, after drinking away his troubles at the town diner, coffee, and he comes back to camp. He gets killed. So the only people left are Bill and Alice. Bill and Alice decide to go investigate where the heck everybody is. They end up finding an axe in Brenda's bed. Ned's truck is disabled, so they can't start the truck. They can't drive away from camp. They try to use the telephones at the office. The telephone is broken. Somebody's cut the line, so they're isolated. They can't get out, and something's going on. So power goes out as well. Somebody's cut the power. Bill decides, I'll go check the power. You just stay back, Alice. You stay back at the main cabin in case somebody shows up. Don't worry about it. I'll be right back. Bill doesn't come back. Alex wakes up. Nobody's around. Power's still off. She decides, I'll make a cup of coffee for me and Bill. This is one of those weird parts in the movie where the movie just kind of stops and Alice just goes through the motions of making coffee. She goes into the kitchens, she lights the stove, she gets some cups, she pours some coffee grounds out, and she goes get some sugar. Then she decides, maybe I should go look for Bill. She goes looking for Bill. She goes to the generator shack where Bill is supposed to be going. She doesn't find him. She finds his rain poncho, but no Bill. She leaves the building, and then she finds Bill on the other side of the door. She doesn't take it too well. She runs back to the main cabin. And Bill's makeup, he's stuck to the door with all these arrows. And he's got this prosthetic on his face, and his eye is like twitching. If you look at closely, his eye is twitching because he has some kind of bad reaction, or it was just distracting to him. But they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it too many times, or at least they couldn't even do it more than once. So it's good enough. Let's get it in the can. Alice goes back to the main cabin, has a freak out, tries to barricade the doors, goes into the kitchen, and then Brenda's body comes through a window, which is actually Tom Savini in a wig. So you find her body now. Alice goes outside and runs into Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies, played by Betsy Palmer, who didn't even want to be in this movie. She took the part because the only reason she took the part was she needed a new car. Her car was breaking down. She thought the script was a piece of shit. She turned it down, apparently, and then her car started breaking, so she's like, nobody's ever going to watch this movie. I might as well do it. I'll get a new car for it. So she drove out herself and did the part, and her and Adrienne King were rehearsing some parts for their fight, and Alice was being actually slapped by Betsy Palmer, because Betsy Palmer was so used to, on the theater stage, actually slapping somebody to get the sound. She wasn't used to, apparently, any more of the motion picture slap, where you make the motion and sound effect is added in later. You don't have to have full contact. So she slapped Adrienne King around a couple times for legitimate. They end up having a fight around the camp after Mrs. Voorhees decides, she's hearing voices in her head, and she doesn't react too well to counselors being in the camp again. So they have a fight around the camp. All around, Mrs. Voorhees keeps coming back like the Terminator, gets knocked down, keeps coming back up. Ends up on the beach, and she ends up getting beheaded by her own machete that she appropriated from somewhere in the camp. Alice decides, I've had enough of this. She grabs a canoe, pushes herself out into the lake, and falls asleep out in the lake. And she wakes up, and the cops are finally there. Somebody's finally come to help. But then Dream Jason comes up and drowns her. But then she wakes up in a hospital bed, and that's the end of the movie, because they never found the boy in the lake. Like I say, fun movie. It's really pretty simple. It's a slow burn type of movie. It's a lot slower than movies today, modern horror movies. There's not a lot of fast edits. Scenes play out for a long time. Lots of times nothing's happening which is fine. What's fun about the movie is it's shot well, it's acted well for what it is, written fairly well, and the characters are enjoyable. They're friendly. You want to be their friend. They're actually enjoyable characters. Not like, the remake from 2009. I hated all the characters. I didn't care about any of them. I'm sorry, if you're going to write a horror movie, make the characters enjoyable and friendly and fun, yet relatable. Well, maybe I'm just nuts about that. But it's a fun movie. And I say, as a former camp staff member, it's really a fun thing. I always enjoyed watching it. I unfortunately binged watched all the movies before I went to work at camp, and if I worked the evening shift, I had to close up the entire building, the administration building, check all the offices were closed up, the lights were off, power was off, and nobody was in the kitchens. And there was only one light outside that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't, so it got fairly dark in that building, especially after I turned the lights off, or power off. And then walking back to my cabin at night. The cabin, it had a door, it had a lock, but the lock didn't work, so it was more for decorative purposes. And it was like a guy's job of decorating, I guess, this thing back in the 70s or whenever it was made. A couple floral curtains on the window, and that's it. Don't need to touch it ever again. So the thing was straight from the movie. But if you haven't watched this movie, I'd really recommend it. It's a lot of fun. It's well acted for what it is. Well shot. Cinematography is really good. Yeah, it's just a fun movie to always just put on and watch, and see who goes away. Yeah. Spend some time with the kids from Crystal Lake, and you'll have a good time.
Oh, shut up, Ralph.